Good morning, students. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Oh, great. All right. So welcome to the fifth semester. Um, just want to encourage each of you that let's focus on learning, and hopefully the university will communicate about exams shortly. So I can understand most of you like yet to give exams and in the new semester. Okay, so just let's focus on learning. Let's understand that learning is more important. Exams are just a milestone, and together we can all make this through. All right. Okay, so in fifth semester, what community medicine does is takes you through communicable diseases. Okay, and you will also begin your postings whenever college begins. You will be attending wards and you will start your clinical postings. So you have learned microbiology. So many of the concepts which I will be sharing will be familiar to you, but let's understand them and revise our basic concepts about communicable disease. Okay. So I hope you remember your epidemiology. So we will be looking at communicable disease from the epidemiologist's point of view. Okay, so what we want to do is we want to review what is the global infectious disease scenario. We are all living in unprecedented times and we are all staying at home and we are hopefully safe because of a pandemic which is occurring currently. So we want to understand the basic concepts in communicable disease epidemiology. We will look at some definitions. We will also understand how disease is transmitted and what are the concepts of when we look at controlling communicable disease, what do you mean by we want to control the disease, what is elimination and what is eradication. Now, what is the importance is that there is a changing pattern of infectious disease. We are discovering new infections. Normally, it would take a long period of time. We know that in influenza, every 7 to 8 years, there is an antigenic drift, and then you get a epidemic every 7 to 8 years. You also have seasonal flu, which keeps coming every season, and therefore you have a new vaccine for every flu season. But every 50 years or so, there is a change, and you get a new virus. But now if you look in the last 20 years, the number of new viruses which have been coming is increasing. So there are new infections which are coming up mostly because of our interactions with new hosts. And also we now understand that many of the things which we called as non-communicable disease should actually be called as chronic disease because their origin may be because of an infectious agent. And we also understand that in the current world that we live, that infectious agents can be used as tools of bioterrorism. So it is important that we focus our attention and understand the basic concepts of infectious diseases. Now, this is a timeline. This is one which I've had on my slide from the last 2 to 3 years. And as you can see, this showed the agent, which was the first new agent that we saw in the 21st century, which was your SARS. And today we call it as the SARS-1 virus, okay, SARS-CoV-1. And to the present, there are many more. So what can we add to this timeline? Can you type some of your answers and send me? I'm going to look at your chat, right? You saw that slide and I showed you agents which were, up to SARS-CoV-1. Now, after SARS-CoV-1, can you tell me some new agents that we have discovered? Right. MERS, SARS-CoV-2. Okay, yes. Right. COVID-19 is the disease and the agent has been renamed as SARS-CoV-2. Yeah. Initially, everything was called COVID, but now we know that the disease is called as COVID. And yes, I need to see some more names. These are just the recent ones, right? SARS. Yes. H1N1, swine flu. Ebola, yes, we had a recurring pandemic, right? What almost threatened the Olympics in Brazil? Zika. That's right. Yes. Yes, avian influenza, H5N1. Right? Okay, Nipah. You remember Nipah? Nipah virus, yes. Okay, so Nipah also, we've had outbreaks in Bangladesh, in India. Okay, it began in Malaysia. So we can see that infectious agents have been increasing. And what is concerning is, if you look at the timeline from here, okay, we had, this timeline shows around 50 years. So beginning with Lassa fever in Nigeria, and then you have Legionnaires and Ebola outbreak in somewhere in 76. Now, if you see, Ebola was something that happened in 76, and then again you had an outbreak which happened in the last couple of years. So why is nobody making a vaccine for Ebola? It happened in 76. It's because the cohort, the number of people that were affected did not cause. Well, look at today, the panic, because it is affecting all countries and large numbers, and therefore the emphasis on getting something new. So vaccine development just does not occur because you have a new agent. It also happens because there is a demand. Okay, so the more number of people who are affected, and that is when you will get a vaccine being developed. That is when it would make sense for them to develop and spend that much money on research and develop a vaccine. All right. So globally, if you look, I've taken this from the Gideon website, and around 434 generic infectious diseases. We have around 1,400 recognized human pathogens and parasites, and two-thirds of deaths from infections in 2010 were caused by around 20 species, and mostly these were bacteria and viruses. If you look at the leading cause, now the whole panic around COVID has been the mortality. Okay, nobody is going to worry if there is common cold. Okay, corona also causes common cold, but we are not worried about common cold. The panic that is happening currently is because of the mortality rate. Initially, people estimated and they thought it was 20%, then it was revised to 10%, and now we are seeing that the mortality is differing in different parts of the world. And that is because we will look as to the reasons as to why mortality patterns change and shift. Okay, so for a long period of time now, if you look detail, we are focusing on non-communicable disease because mortality from non-communicable disease has been increasing in comparison to the communicable diseases. If you look down here in this slide, you can see that the top four causes are all related to non-communicable diseases. And then you have the list of communicable disease which are coming in. So your lower respiratory tract infection, tracheal bronchi infections, HIV/AIDS, which is another pandemic that is occurring, where we are dealing with. Mortality rates are like around 1.5 million. Diarrheal diseases. And then again, you can look at the bottom of the list. You also have, again, more non-communicable disease. So what has happened was that infectious disease began to get neglected because mortality rates were going down. And so non-communicable disease were coming out, and we realized that we have to focus more attention on non-communicable disease. But in countries like Nepal, we have a triple burden. We have infectious disease burden, we have non-communicable disease, as well as we have a whole chunk of maternal and child health illnesses, which we have to cope with. Okay, so this is between 2000 and 2012. If you compare and look at the rates, okay, how they are increasing. Now let's look at in terms. This is from 1990 onwards, and these are projected to 2050. As you can see, infectious, and we compare with non-infectious and injuries. These injuries are mostly because of road traffic accidents. We can see everywhere that the rate of deaths which are occurring are more because of non-infectious reasons and injuries. Okay, so why is this happening? Why are we having a change in pattern? If you look at the last slide, D, what we find is it's because there is increasing population every year. We are adding a new cohort of children who are born, and also because we are living longer and because of aging of population. Now, these two interesting ones are also the reason which are causing most of your deaths. If you look at the area, the regions in which deaths are occurring in larger numbers, it's because they have an aging population. So we find the demographic trends do affect mortality pattern, and your herd structure affects immunity. Okay, so yes, so you'll have all answered this question, what is the latest epidemic that we are facing? And we know that it is not just an epidemic, it is a pandemic. Okay. So how do microbiologists look or classify communicable disease or infectious disease? So depending on the agent which causes the disease, they can be classified as bacterial, viral, fungal, parasitic, or also it can be caused due to prions. Now, when we were students, we had no concept of prions. Okay, prions is something that has come in the recent past. Okay, so let's look at the spectrum of infectious agents, and the size here is just to give you an indication as to how large. Now look at streptococcus; it's so large. Okay, and compare it with your vaccinia or the pox virus. Look at rickettsia. Okay, psittacosis; they are much larger. And then you have your the phages which come in, which look much bigger in comparison to the viruses. Now, just to give you an idea as to how these sizes are coming is, if you look at the blue margin here, that is the size of the gene, okay? And this is egg albumin. This is an egg albumin. That is the size of your molecule of egg albumin, okay? And this is horse hemoglobin. Okay, so compare the size of these particles. Okay, that is why it's important, because some of them can be large, what we can see with our naked eye, and what we cannot see and we need to see under a scope. And some of them are so small that you cannot see them through your normal scope, but you have to see them, look at them through the electron microscope. So the first thing that defines that we look at, especially from the microbiologist point, is what is the size of the agent. Okay, and then they classify them as depending on what kind of stain we need to see in order to that we can identify. So if you use, they are classified as gram positive and gram negative organisms. So then you can have cocci, the ones which are spherical or round, and these can be occur in clusters. So you have Staph aureus, which comes in clusters, and Streptococcus pneumoniae. Then you get chains, what you see typically in Streptococcus pyogenes. Then you get rod-like organisms, for example, as in Bacillus for anthrax, and your Haemophilus influenzae. Now, this is Haemophilus influenzae. Okay. Is this a virus or is it bacteria? Haemophilus influenzae, right? And do we have a vaccine? Do we have a vaccine for this? Okay, so what does the vaccine protect the child from? So please remember, this is a common question we ask you in the Viva. Okay, pentavalent vaccine. Okay, yes, pentavalent vaccine. So the Hib component is Haemophilus influenza B. Okay, so why do we give that to the children? Okay, think about that. We'll come back. Right. So just because you hear the word influenza doesn't mean that this protects against influenza. Okay, so this is Haemophilus influenza. When you have the Vibrio, these are short. Okay, these are short, curved, spiral ones, and so they're called as cocobacilli. Okay, and then you can get Borrelia, which are like thin, very thin whip-like action. Then you get, okay, and the viruses. Now we come to our viruses, which can have an envelope, and some which do not have an envelope. And basically, viruses are divided as DNA and RNA viruses, and they can be single-stranded or double-stranded viruses. And then you have fungi of medical importance, dermatophytes, yeast, and molds. So that is how a microbiologist will look at infectious disease, looking at what is the type of agent, what is the size, what is the type of stain, if it's a virus, is it a DNA virus, is it an RNA virus. Okay. So when the patients come and they present with symptoms, okay, so the clinician sees signs and symptoms, and therefore we classify disease as diarrheal diseases, respiratory diseases. COVID-19 was predominantly a respiratory disease, an acute respiratory disease. Okay, it's an RDS, ARDS. You can have soft tissue infections. You can have disease which primarily affect the central nervous system. You can have infections which affect multiple organs and cause organ failure, what is called as septicemia, and spreads through the blood. And you have another category which is fever of unknown origin, FUO or PUO. If patient comes with fever for more than 2 weeks and which is not on investigations, you do not know the reason, and that is called as FUO. Okay. From the public health point of view or from the epidemiologist point of view, how do we look at disease? So we look at what is the source or reservoir of infection, how is this disease being transmitted, what are the modes of transmission, and who are the susceptibles. Okay, so where can this disease, to whom can it be transmitted? So that these are three important areas that need to be identified in terms of epidemiology. What is the source or reservoir of infection? What are the modes of transmission? And who are the susceptible hosts? So what is the chain of infection? Okay, so now we will look at a chain. Okay, so a chain, you have links, multiple links, right? So you begin with infectious agent, then you're looking at reservoirs. What are the portal of exit? So how does the agent leave the host? How does it leave a reservoir? How did it move out from a reservoir? How does it get transmitted? What does it use? Is it transmitted through air, water, food? What is it being transmitted through? What are the means of transmission? How does it enter a susceptible host? And then what happens to the infectious agent in the susceptible host? Is the host a dead end or does it multiply? And then is there person-to-person transmission? Is the host an obligate host, or is this host, is there a cycle which this host undergoes? So these are all what we see in from the epidemiology point of view. Okay. So now we are looking at basic concepts. Okay. So what is an infectious agent? All microorganisms, macroorganisms which can produce an infection or an infectious disease. Okay. So there is a difference. If you just have presence of the agent, it is infection. And if you have signs and symptoms which accompany it, then it is a disease. And like I've already told you, you can also have prions which can be infectious. So an infectious disease is defined as an illness which is caused by a specific infectious agent or its toxic product that results from transmission of that agent or its products from an infected person, animal, or reservoir to a susceptible host, either directly or indirectly through an intermediate plant or animal host. It can be a vector or also the inanimate environment. Okay, so that's a long thing. Basically, it's defining that chain which you saw. Okay, so you have an infectious agent which gets transmitted, uses a mode of transmission that could be, it could be direct, it could be indirect, and your reservoir can be an animal, person, or it can be an inanimate object. Basically, a reservoir should allow the infectious agent to multiply and to stay there and to survive. Now, you often hear the term infectious disease and communicable disease. So let's try to see what is the difference between these terminologies. So an infectious disease is caused by a microorganism. Okay. And it is potentially transferable to new individuals. But it is not always communicable. For instance, if you have a toxin which is producing the disease, for like if you have food poisoning, okay, and so it's only when that food is consumed. But if a person has consumed that food which has been contaminated by a toxin, he is not going to be contagious to another person who's standing next to him. So when it is caused by a toxin, then the person is not going to act as transmitted to the other one. So it may or may not be communicable, because especially ones which are caused by toxins, such as even tetanus. So if you have a case of tetanus, the person is suffering from an infectious disease, but he is not contagious, or the disease is not communicable to the people around. Okay. A communicable disease, on the other hand, is always an infectious disease, but this is contagious. That means it can be transmitted from one source to another by the propagation of the bacteria or virus. So, what is a contagious disease? A contagious disease is one which is transmitted through contact. So, diseases such as scabies. So, if one person has scabies in the family, one person gets scabies, and that itch mite comes into the house. If it is not treated, he will pass it on to all people who have close contact with him, he or she. Okay, because this itch mite lives in the clothes, and they can spread, and they can walk, and they can contaminate. Okay, so they can spread. Trachoma, sexually transmitted diseases, okay, leprosy, these are all contagious diseases because they can be spread through contact. An infection is a term that defines the entrance and development of an infectious agent in a human or animal body, whether or not it develops into a disease. And the best example for this is your HIV infection. So the person has HIV, has, you can test for it, has the HIV, has the agent in the body, but may not manifest those symptoms if they take good diet and keep themselves well. They can be asymptomatic for 10 years. Earlier, we thought that as soon as you have HIV infection, it is a death sentence. But today, people are living for 15 years, 20 years, okay, living with with HIV infection. And only the last stage of it, when they develop signs and symptoms, you have AIDS. Okay, so it goes into disease. So detection of a state in which there are no signs of recognized related disease is called as inapparent infection. Now, how does disease, infectious disease, how do they appear in the populations, human populations? Okay, so all of you, I'm sure, know what is an epidemic. Okay, you know what's an endemic. I hope you know what that is. Okay, so the first, let's look at what is an endemic. Okay, endemic diseases, especially in India, malaria is endemic because you get malaria cases. Okay, so the continuous occurrence at an expected frequency over a certain period of time and in a certain geographical area is called as an endemic form. So diseases can occur as an endemic form. Now, when they occur, you have a high level of infection and which begins right from the time when the people are young, and it predominantly affects a young population. These are called as holoendemic. Okay, it's called as holoendemic. Where all ages are affected equally, then that is called as hyperendemic. So endemic is a continuous presence of an agent, and there is a certain expected frequency over a certain period of time in a particular geographic area. Now, if this begins at a young age and young people are more affected, then that is called as holoendemic. While endemic form, all ages are equally affected, then it is called as hyperendemic. What usually happens now, typically malaria is a holoendemic because the younger people, the one who are born, the newer cohort, they do not have immunity, and so they are the ones who are more susceptible, while those who have lived for a longer period of time, they have acquired natural immunity to the host, and therefore you will find that the occurrence of disease in older ages, as you grow older and older, it decreases. Now, epidemic. Okay, epidemic is, since we are talking about disease, I have referred everything to here as disease. Please remember, in epidemiology, it need not be only disease. We can look at all health-related states or events. Okay, so here we've written as disease. So whenever disease occurs in excess of the expected, then it is known as an epidemic. Okay, and to just remember what is epidemiology and what is epidemic. So epidemiology, initially, McMahon and Pugh, they said study of something that comes upon the people. So demos, epi is upon and demos is people. Now, you can have epidemics which occur upon the endemic states. So you always have a certain constant level of malaria, but you can have during rainy season when the vector population increases because of the humidity, you can have outbreaks, further outbreaks. So you can have excess, increase in the number of the endemic, and that is known as epidemics occurring on top of the endemic state. So what is an outbreak? What is an epidemic? And what's a pandemic? So we are currently facing a pandemic. So when the epidemic is generalized and it involves different countries and a large population, it is called as a pandemic. When the epidemic is restricted to a small geographical area or population, it is called an outbreak. So when this began in Wuhan and a couple of cases were reported, that would have been when COVID-19, the outbreak in Wuhan. Whenever you have few cases which were reported, that would be an outbreak. So ideally, what is tend to do is, rather what we're doing now is policing at borders. Okay, what is more preferable is to contain an outbreak. Okay, so what we are identifying now, all these hot spots and green, red, and yellow, is trying to isolate areas which are having a more number of cases so that we can reduce the transmission. Okay, so when epidemic is restricted to a small geographical area or population, it is called an outbreak. When the epidemic is restricted to a non-human population, then it is called as a what is it called? I'm going to keep checking intermittently. Okay, good. We have 115 with us. That's nice. Right. Okay, so the minute we have the word zootic, which comes in, so zoonosis is to do with animals. Okay, so if it occurs only among animals, then it is an epizootic. Okay. You can also have exotic disease and sporadic disease. Okay, people go for a holiday to Maldives and come back with chikungunya. Okay, so chikungunya began as an very exotic disease. Okay, you went for a holiday and came back with it, and then once it come back, it comes into the so then it is an imported disease, which then becomes it finds a suitable vector, and then it stays and becomes it can become an epidemic. Okay, so exotic diseases are those which are imported. Okay, so just like you import goods, even diseases can be imported and exported, and that is what has happened currently. Is that disease has got exported to different parts of the world. So normally you find that it appears that water is like a barrier to rabies. So in most island countries and nations, you do not have cases of rabies. Okay, it may be because their animal population is cut off from other, and so that animal circulation cycle which happens is not occurring. And so normally in islands, rabies is not found. So one large such island is the United Kingdom. So if they get a case of rabies, for them that would be an exotic case. Okay, so exotic is any imported disease which does not occur normally in the country but has come from outside. And sporadic, of course, means scattered about. So when cases occur irregularly, they happen haphazardly, time to time, and generally they are infrequent. Okay, so what has happened now is because of certain interventions that we have put in place. So because we have achieved good success with polio elimination, so when cases of polio are reported now, they are sporadic cases. Okay, they occur only sometimes, and usually they occur in areas which are affected by war. Okay, so war, conflict areas, these are the places in which most of your cases of polio, meningococcal meningitis, all of these occur. Okay. So, but we have to be careful. A sporadic disease could be the starting point of an epidemic. Okay. The next category of disease is zoonosis. So zoonosis is an infection that is transmissible under natural conditions from vertebrate animals to man. And you have a whole long list. And rabies comes right at the top. Now, why is rabies right at the top at the beginning? Why is everybody so scared of rabies? I want to see you type some options. Why rabies right at the list? When we ask you also, okay, these are common things. So name some communicable disease, name some infections, okay, name some zoonosis. Has anybody have had to take a rabies vaccine anytime? No idea about rabies? 100% mortality. I've sat in a rabies uh, immunization clinic and the patients would come frightened, especially when it was a street dog that has bit them. Normally, you have to tell people, please come back for a vaccine, please be careful, normal routine immunization, but rabies vaccine, you don't have to. They are so careful, so particular. 5 injections, they come promptly. It's because of the 100% mortality which is associated with rabies. So one of the most important zoonotic diseases is rabies, and also because the canine, most of what we have as pet animals, dogs, cats, these are also capable of transmitting rabies, and those of you who have pets must be seeing that they are vaccinated. Okay, it's important to have your pets vaccinated for common zoonotic diseases. So rabies, plague, bovine tuberculosis. Epizootic is an epidemic which happens among animals, and an enzootic is an endemic which happens in animals. Right, now you can have shift. Okay, so the host can jump from an animal to human. It can also jump from humans to animals. Okay, so anthropozoonosis is when infections are transmitted to man from vertebrate animals. And zoo, so just when you see how the word is kept, and zoo is when you have zooanthroponosis, infections which are transmitted from man to vertebrate animals. Then you have amphizoonosis, which are maintained in both man as well as lower vertebrates. Okay. Nosocomial infections. These are an important source. In fact, if you see today, especially in the low-income countries, we are reporting lower levels of mortality because everyone is sitting at home and there's nobody on the road. So we have lesser amount of road traffic accidents. Okay, we have lesser people visiting health facilities, and we have hardly anybody. There is no, except for deliveries as well as emergency cases, there are no people in hospitals. And your nosocomial infection rate is also down. Okay, so nosocomial infections are also an important. So when we often think of healthcare settings, we want people to get well, but some people can also catch infection when they are admitted to a hospital. So a new infection which is not related to the patient's primary condition, so infection of surgical wounds, urinary tract infections, hepatitis B because of invasive procedures, these are examples of nosocomial infections. Opportunistic infections, we are all aware of that because of HIV infection. So whenever the immunity of a host decreases because of the defect in the host defense, so you have organisms which normally will not cause disease that take the opportunity, and so you get infections by cytomegalovirus, pneumocystis carinii, herpes simplex, and you also have atypical mycobacteria which can cause tuberculosis in persons with low immunity. Right. So when we talk about a host in epidemiology of infectious disease, the host is a simple or complex organism who is the target of an infecting action of a specific infectious agent. When the host harbors the agent in a mature stage or in a sexually active stage, then that host is called as the definitive host. And when the host harbors the agent in the larval stage or asexual development, then the host is called as the intermediate host. So let's hold our thought there and let's see in malaria, what type of host is man? Is man the definitive host or the intermediate host for malaria? Right. Right. So all of you are clear on that. Great. Now, sometimes the agent has only one host, and then that host is referred to as the obligate host. So now let's look at contagion and transmission. So contagion is not a new idea. Contagion is a very old idea, and they would actually think that these clouds of fumes would rise from swamps and they would cause contagions. And most of the diseases they thought was occurring because of contagion. Okay, and that is why even malaria is still called as malaria, because they thought it occurs because of bad air. Okay, so contagion is not a new idea; it's an old idea. So contagion is transmission of infectious from one individual to another, that is direct transmission. Okay. Now we also know that contagion can also happen because of indirect transmission. Okay. And this mediator can be air, it can be a living object. If it is living, we call them as vectors. If they are inanimate, we call them as vehicles. So water and food are called as vehicles, and insects are called as vectors. So contamination. Contamination is a situation in which in one person or object hosts an infectious agent and thus converts itself into a potential vehicle of dissemination of this agent. So any inanimate being, it can be insect, animal, or inanimate substance, water, air, they can transport an etiological agent, and they are called as vehicles of dissemination. When the transmission of an agent is intermediated by an arthropod, this arthropod is called a vector. Okay. So your main modes of transmission are direct transmission and indirect transmission. So direct transmission, transmission of infectious agent due to direct contact with skin, mucosa, or mucosa to skin. Okay. It can be a same person. So you can have, viral warts. Warts can be transmitted. They are contagious to the person also. So if you have one touches, it can move to the other person. Okay, it can be contaminated to another person, and also the host himself also can get affected. Okay, so scabies, conjunctivitis, lice. Okay, the eye infection for a neonate. These are all because the child, when it passes through the birth canal, child can get the infection. Okay. Direct inoculation into skin or mucosa, so dog bite. Okay. Hepatitis B, parental, if you have, unfortunately, if the syringe or the needle is contaminated, or if your blood products or parental, there's uh, agents are contaminated, or if you receive blood transfusion, they can be contaminated, you can have dissemination of hepatitis B. Okay, so this is direct transmission because of inoculation to skin or direct inoculation of the agent. Droplet infection. Okay, everybody is now studying what is the size of the COVID, of the SARS-CoV-2. Okay, initially they said, oh, this cannot be caught from the air, only when the person sneezes or coughs, so you have to clean the surfaces, deep disinfection. Okay, only avoid direct. Okay, so stand far away. Droplet infection. So direct projection or spray of droplet saliva and nasopharyngeal secretions. So if a person is coughing or sneezing and that happens in close contact, then it can impinge on the mucosa of the other person and it can lead to a transmission of the infection. So what are the factors which cause? So if there is overcrowding, many people in a room, all breathing the same air, you have poor ventilation, it will favor transmission. And especially if you stand very close, then it is going to impact the transmission. Now, another form of direct transmission is contact with soil. So when people walk barefoot and you have parasites in the soil, you can get hookworm infection. Okay, so hookworm, tetanus spores, the reservoir for tetanus spores is soil, and so you can get. So this is all example of direct transmission. And last but not the least is a transmission from mother to child. So all your torch infections, syphilis, hepatitis B, HIV, all of these can be transmitted. So normally the placenta acts as a very good barrier and blocks the larger sized organisms and pathogens, but the smaller ones, viruses are much smaller and they tend to cross the placental barrier and they can infect the child. So those are the methods of direct transmission, and now we will look at indirect transmission. So airborne. So you must be wondering what is the difference between droplet and what is airborne. So it is about the size of the particle. Okay, so when somebody sneezes or coughs, the large particles they drop down to the surfaces, and the smaller ones which remain, they dry up and then they can travel a long distance. So droplet nuclei are the ones which can go for a long distance and they are responsible for, that's why they can affect a larger area. While the larger particles, what happens is they will settle down and they will settle in the dust. So when especially hospital wards are being cleaned, wiped, swept or dusted, that's when these particles can again be raised. Now fomites. Fomites are inanimate articles or substances other than food and water which are contaminated by infectious. Now, an important fomite for you that you need to remember is your mobile phone, because we carry it with us everywhere, even when you go to the washroom also. You don't give it a break. Okay? So please be careful. See that you clean all the objects that you carry around with you and keep them clean. Okay? Because these can get contaminated. And I'm sure all of you have heard how door handles, knobs, okay, lift doors, buttons, all of these can act as sources of contamination. So inanimate article substances other than food or water which are contaminated by infectious discharge from patients, and they can have, so an important fomite are your hands, and that's why you've been told keep cleaning your hands. But you have to see that the water is clean and also use your water very carefully, because water is another important resource that we need to conserve. Okay, so this is just to show you how droplet nuclei can circulate, and that is why in the hospital facilities the AC has been turned off. In the current fight against COVID, hospital AC systems have been switched off because your AC systems and the ducting can act as a conduit for, as a vent for the circulation of the infectious agent and spread it. Okay, so they can spread through the vents and the exhaust, okay, in the buildings. And this is to explain about droplets. As you can see, large droplets, they fall down because of their weight. And the aerosols, the dried residue, that is what can reach the lungs of a susceptible, and that is what can form on the objects, okay, can form fomites. And that's why it's important that we maintain a certain distance. Right. So we've seen about the agent and how it gets transmitted. It can get transmitted directly or indirectly. Another agent that the agent, right, takes is the vector, right? So the vector can simply be mechanical, like when your flies they come and sit on food, it is mechanical contamination. Okay, they can just be simple mechanical. It can also be biological because the vector needs to pass through the host for its development. And so the vector and host properties, and that is why is the reason for which you are taught about entomology. Okay, so vectors of medical importance and entomology has been taken for you. So it's important to know what is the density, what are the insecticide that you use, what are the feeding habits, okay, what are the breeding places, what are the sites, because if we can intervene in the vector site, we can break the cycle of disease transmission. But that is easier said than done, as we all know with malaria and dengue. So when an agent uses a vector, it can simply propagate, only multiply in the vector, as happens in the case of plague bacilli, or they can undergo a change in form as well as number, and that is called a cyclopropagative, like a malarial parasite, or they can only develop cyclodevelopment. Only the agent develops, but it does not increase in number. For example, with the microfilaria for filariasis. A reservoir of infection is the primary source of infection in a local. So this reservoir of infection can be a person, it can be an animal, it can be an arthropod, it can be plant, it can be soil or substance. So we have a variety, and that is why some people now you must have heard of reports that even animals are getting corona, and you had that some pet dogs have been put out of the homes because people are frightened that the dog could get the infection and could act. as a reservoir of infection. Okay, so we still do not know about which are the other animals which can act as reservoir of infection for the current pandemic. Okay, so any so a reservoir of infection is the primary source of infection. So the infectious agent, it finds conditions that permit it to survive, multiply, and from there it can be transmitted to a susceptible host. And so it's important that we know what is the reservoir of infection. The source of infection is the person, animal, object, or substance from which the infectious agent passes or is disseminated to the host. So reservoir can be human, animal, or it can be non-living. For infection to occur, you have to have interaction and contact between agent and host. And whenever it is effectively transmitted, that means there is a very efficient contact. And what is important is the infective dose. That is the number of units of the infectious agent which is required to produce the disease. Okay. So whenever infection occurs, you go through incubation period, latent period. So incubation period is the interval between the effective exposure of the susceptible host to an infectious agent and the appearance of signs and clinical symptoms of the disease in that host. Latent period is the time from disease initiation to the detection. Okay. Prodromal period is the period between perception of illness by the host and the appearance of signs and symptoms based on which you have clinical diagnosis. So I'm not feeling well, I'm feeling not too well, but there are no specific signs and symptoms. Okay, general malaise, I'm feeling tired, that kind of thing. That is your prodromal period. Okay, till such a time as when the person develops fever or specific symptoms which you can locate. Okay, these are respiratory symptoms. This is okay, so that would become the specific a club of sinuses. So you can say this particular disease. So in the prodromal period, you're not very sure what it is. So what is the communicable period? It is a time interval during which the infected host, person may be ill, may not be ill, eliminates an agent to the environment and new susceptible individuals can become infected. Now this is very variable and you will be seeing so many diseases and you will see variable, but a general measure is between 10 to 14 days is usually a safe. Okay, there are some diseases which have much shorter and some diseases which have much longer incubation period. On an average, around 2 weeks. Okay, 10 to 14 days is a safe period. And therefore, you find that for quarantine, when people, it's normally 2 weeks. If you're not sure in a quarantine about, then twice they estimate it. Okay, so that is why initially they said around 2 weeks and then they extended it to around 3 weeks. Okay, so you increase the time in which you isolate or quarantine. Okay. So please remember, infectious disease, that you isolate person who has the signs and symptoms or who has the infection, and you quarantine persons who have been exposed but do not know. You do not know whether they are infection or not. So people who have been exposed are quarantined and persons who have the disease are isolated. Okay, so that is the difference between isolation and quarantine. Right. So we have to understand what is the infectivity, pathogenicity, as well as the virulence of the infectious agent. Okay. So now what happens with infectious agents is whenever they establish themselves in an individual, they want to survival of the species is very important. So they're always trying to find and infect new susceptible individuals. Okay. So infectivity is the ability of an infectious agent to cause a new infection in a susceptible host. So in directly transmitted diseases, we call it as the secondary attack rate. The number of people who are susceptible, who develop the infection after exposure to a primary case. That is the secondary attack rate. So who is a susceptible? Okay. So susceptibility depends on whether we have a form of active immunity or there is passive immunity. So active immunity can be generated through either because you are exposed to the agent and you had a natural infection, or because you have received a immunological. Okay. And passive immunity occurs either because you get antibodies or from mother to child. Okay. Maternal antibodies are passed to the child and they develop passive immunity. So we're all talking, I'm sure you must have heard about in COVID. Oh, I think in all the populations where malaria is happening, your natural killer cells are much higher and we have immunity. Okay, so there seems to be some credence. We don't know exactly unless we get more data. But these are all speculations. You must have heard another one in which, oh, areas in which BCG vaccine is being given, those areas are seem to be more protected. Well, we have to wait and see. Maybe, may not be. Okay, so natural immunity is innate immunity of humans or other animal species to specific infectious agents. Now, the proportions of individual in a population with immunity to a specific infectious agent is what is your herd immunity. So Britain tried to do that. United Kingdom tried to say, oh, we will allow people to come in, we will try to develop herd immunity, and then we will fight it out. So that initially, yes, we will have a lot of cases, but then we will have, our peak will be, initial peak will be higher, but it will be for a shorter period and we will ride it out. But soon enough, we realize that this agent seems to be a little different. And because this is an unknown agent and we do not know how many people need to be infected in order to get herd immunity. And as we see about herd immunity also, I'll explain later as to why that particular theory may not have worked. So herd immunity is very important because it defines the transmission dynamics. So whenever a new virus comes in, because there is no existing herd immunity in a population, that is why it spreads very fast, because you have a large number of susceptibles. Okay, so the diffusibility of a new agent is much more rapid. Infected individuals or animals who do not show clinically recognizable symptoms of a given disease upon examination, but who host the agent, are your healthy or the asymptomatic carriers. So from the public health point of view, the carriers are very important. That is why we would always show you the iceberg phenomenon and say, look, what are coming to the hospital are your severe cases. But where is the disease happening? The transmission is happening in the community. And therefore, it is important to identify people who are healthy carriers and not just the transient ones. Those who are chronic carriers, those who are discharging the organism for a long period of time. Now, some people may have this infection. So these are the people who carry, these carriers are having latent infection. Okay, they stay silently for a long period of time, but sometimes they may develop disease. So this stage of carrying, of hosting the organism but not having signs or symptoms is called as latent infection. So carriers are having latent infection. So herd immunity, it provides immunological barrier to the spread of disease, and they can be determined by your serological surveys. Okay, it depends on the occurrence of clinical and subclinical infections. It depends on whether there is a vaccine available, you can immunize the herd, and also it depends on the herd structure. Now, herd structure is your demographic of the population. Okay, and therefore we find that in countries which are having a herd structure which is elderly, they are having more of mortality. And now comes the interplay between the communicable and the non-communicable disease, because comorbidities are making people more susceptible. Okay, so it is not just whether you're exposed to the agent or not, but if you have hypertension, if you're elderly, if you have hypertension, diabetes, or if you have an pre-existing lung condition, these people are more at high risk. Now we have another cohort which has come out at high risk, who are the healthcare professionals. So all clinicians who are attending to these patients, because they're in close contact, despite all wearing, they are the ones. So you're finding that mortality is occurring among the elderly, and also mortality is occurring among the healthcare professionals. Okay, so that is why it's important. It's not just doctors, but doctors, nurses, all the staff who are there in the ICU, and the people who are taking care, as well as those who are disposing the bodies. All of these people are susceptible. Okay, so when we take measures for prevention, so who has to be tested aggressively now are the healthcare professionals and their families. Okay, so infectivity, pathogenicity, and virulence, you all know about this. So infectivity is measured by secondary attack rate. It is the propensity for transmission. Pathogenicity is the ability of an agent to produce clinical disease or symptoms, which is measured by your apparent and inapparent infection ratio. So it has actually been estimated that for every case that we are testing positive, they must be, so there is active transmission going on in the community right now for COVID-19. Okay, but thankfully, most of these are asymptomatic. Okay, and virulence is measured by the case fatality ratio. Okay, so as you must be seeing, as we are testing more number of cases, our mortality rates are decreasing because your denominator is increasing. Okay, so attack rate is the proportion of non-immune individuals who are exposed who become clinically ill. Now, who is the primary case? The first person who came into contact and infects a population is the primary case. All other cases who develop from that are your secondary cases. Okay. The index case is the one who first comes to the attention of the medical personnel or the investigator. So whichever case came first to the hospital, that would be, or this was reported first, that would be your index case. Okay. Now we are seeing so many mathematical models. I'm sure all of you have become experts in public health. Okay. Everybody's predicting, oh, look at the doubling rate. Look, it took 1 week for it to, initially, it took so many weeks for it to double, and now it's doubling at this rate. So we are all very well aware. Okay. So these are very interesting models. Let me just explain to you as to how these models estimate. Okay. So what mathematical models do is they study the host and the organism. They look at the population dynamics. Okay, so it's very important that the demographic structure has to be considered. Therefore, Oxford's initial estimation that India will have more than 3 million deaths were far exaggerated because they were modeling it on the basis of results that they were getting from UK. Okay, so they have had to subsequently revise their estimates. Okay, so how do they do this modeling? You divide the population into three: who are the susceptibles, that means people who can acquire infection; then who are the infectives, that means who are the people who can transmit the infection; and then the removals, who are immune or dead as a consequence of infection. And so this is known as the SIR model. Okay, in a host population, in its first contact with the population of agents, obviously your S is going to be 1 and your I and R are 0. Okay, as the infection disseminates, the S decreases, and I increases. So transmissibility, I'm sure all of you know about R0. Okay, so what is R0? Basic reproduction rate. The average number of secondary infections produced when one infected individual is introduced into a host population in which every host is susceptible. So these are assumptions which are made that everybody is susceptible, and if one person comes in, and right now we're estimating that the R0 for COVID is between 2 to 3, okay, around 2.3. Okay, so it's between 2 and 3. So what does this R0 mean? Okay, so if R0 is 1, the number of cases are stable. It indicates that your disease is endemic. If R0 is more than 1, the number of cases are increasing and it will become an epidemic. Okay, and so we saw it was a high R0. And so this epidemic, because it was not checked, it has become a pandemic. And if your R0 is less than 1, then the number of cases is decreasing. So what these mathematical models will do is look at the R0, and these R0s can be calculated from your statistical software. There are software which is available. You put in the number of cases, you put in the number of everyday reporting, and you see, and you can see how. Now, one important thing that you have to remember in this that we are assuming is that if once a person becomes infected, we are assuming that they will remain immune to the disease. And that is what is shifting in COVID-19. We are not able to assume now that if a person has got COVID-19 and he recovers from it, that he has got immunity. Okay, that he is immune. So that is one flaw. That is one thing that has not been accounted for. Okay, and that is why the fear that the persons, what we assumed was we will work with herd immunity, and that's why the concept of herd immunity has not been working, because even those who have been affected may not remain immune to the disease. Okay, and that is the uncertainty that we are seeing with COVID-19. Okay. Then you can also have molecular epidemic when we use molecular biology techniques, when you're doing serotyping and you're doing antibody testing, all of that, okay, then that is called as molecular epidemiology. Now, this molecular epidemiology can be useful. We have had a lot of kits which have come in. So if you want it for a patient that we know now we have to use an RT-PCR, but we have a lot of kits which have got the rapid diagnostic, you've got IgM, antibodies. These can be used for epidemiological testing and tracing. Tomorrow to see how many people had infection. Okay, these kits can be used. Of course, we still don't know about their sensitivity and specificity. Okay, but they can be used to study COVID. You can also have biomarkers, okay, which will help you to differentiate, okay, who are those people, is it able to produce, are they producing it, okay, or not. Exposure markers, can you identify what are the susceptibility markers, okay. We will have a separate class on emerging and re-emerging disease, and okay, in which we will talk in detail about COVID as well. We also have persistent infectious agents. Today, I would just like to finish by looking at control, elimination, and eradication. I will just take 1 minute more just to take you through what is control, elimination, and eradication. Oh. So when we say we want to control disease, we allow the disease. Okay, so we are trying to we say disease is permitted to exist in the community, but at a level where it ceases to be a public health problem. Okay, so there is an equilibrium, agent host. We let the disease or agent be there, but as long as it doesn't cause too many cases, not too many deaths, we're okay. Okay, so that is control. Elimination is we are trying to interrupt transmission. Okay, and that's what we are doing in poliomyelitis. So when we are vaccinating, doing a large-scale vaccination, we are interrupting, and that's why we only see sporadic cases. I don't know if any of you will even see measles, because we have had such high rates of coverage for measles vaccination. Okay, this is the one success story that we've had with poliomyelitis. 1988, just when the polio vaccine was introduced, you can see those red areas. And look, this is 2006, and currently even India is polio free, and I think only sporadic cases are being reported from Afghanistan and a country in Africa. And finally, uh, disease eradication. Till now, we've managed to eradicate only one disease. As all of us know, you are no longer vaccinated for smallpox. I have received smallpox vaccination because we have, but remember that the smallpox virus, a small portion is kept in Atlanta, Georgia, and also I think Russia has one small portion which is kept under deep storage. Now, if God forbid anybody gets access to that, it can be a disaster. Okay, and that is why it's important. Infectious disease, though we may have had, we thought that we have a handle on it and we're able to control. Look at the high-income countries now, because when you have new agents, you do not have any exposure of your population. They're susceptible and they have much higher mortality rates. So eradication is means to tear out by the roots, terminate all transmission by extermination. And so not all diseases or agents can be suitable for extermination. We will look at characteristics of agents which are suitable. So for example, if you have many reservoirs, if you have extra human reservoir, you have a reservoir in the soil, it's difficult to eradicate that agent. If you have a lot of subclinical cases or inapparent infections, it's difficult. We were able to eradicate smallpox because it did not have extra human reservoir. Okay, so what we have now is monkeypox, which is happening in among monkeys, and that can threaten, if it gets transmitted to human beings, that can cause a potential. And therefore, these are diseases which are under surveillance, and these agents are what, though they are so small in size and they are dependent, they cannot even survive on their own without a human cell or a host cell, they can cause havoc. Okay, so I end my presentation on introduction, and I encourage all of you